Hey guys, this is Steve Reichert. You're watching the Adventure Photo Show. I am an adventure photographer and filmmaker. I love being outside with a camera. That is my passion. And the purpose of this show is to encourage you to go out there, tell your story with the camera, and have fun doing it. Enjoy the process of photography. And this is the Sunday night live stream, and it's been a little while since I've had a chance to do them because I have been busy with school. I have been busy with work and life, got a lot of things going on. I'm in nursing school right now, and actually have a whole bunch of exams tomorrow and Wednesday. So 4 exams this week, and almost didn't do the live stream tonight, but since I've been playing with the Panasonic G9 and kind of testing it a little bit against the GH5, I figured, well, I'll do at least a short live stream tonight, maybe answer your questions a little bit about some of these cameras I've been playing with, and hopefully take some questions, give some opinions all at the same time. Now, I recently made a video where I mentioned that I was going to be going away from the Fuji system because I need a video. I need a video and photo, a hybrid shooting rig, and so I already had the GH5, and so this I'm probably not going to talk a lot about the GH5 tonight specifically, but I already had the GH5 when I decided to sell off my Fuji X-E3. And I was, really curious after having kind of made that declaration. I made another video too where I declared my decision and my reasoning behind not waiting for the Fuji X-H1, even though I love Fuji cameras, but why I don't really feel like Fuji is necessarily right in the wheelhouse for what I want for a true hybrid camera that's going to give me high-end stills and high-end video. I don't really know that it's all the way there, even though it's a beautiful camera with some really nice looking features on it. So I decided that even though my commitment to the Micro Four Thirds system has been declared, I was able to con a friend into letting me borrow this G9, so it's not costing me anything. But I was really curious and jumped at the opportunity because of the fact that I really wanted to see if all the hubbub and the hype that I had been hearing about the G9 being on par with Micro Four, or I'm sorry, with the G9 being on par with APS-C size sensor, and kind of being like Fuji-ish in the way the raw files handled. Uh, you know, I was really curious, and so I wanted to test it out. Now, I am going to have a video hopefully out this week where I'm going to show you what I shot, both stills and video, just kind of a real world review where I kind of went out and shot some stuff in my normal way. I'm actually starting a new channel that's really focused on the stuff that I actually do outdoors, specifically fly fishing and kind of little adventures outdoors with my daughter. I'll leave that description in the show notes below. But if you're interested in seeing something a little bit less technical about the photography and filmmaking and just want to see what I'm actually outside doing, you can subscribe to that channel as well. So, my whole standpoint of looking at all this was to see, is the G9 for almost the same amount of money? Actually, you can get the GH5 for about the same on eBay. You can get the GH5 on eBay for about the same as what you would pay for the G9 new. So it's like for about the same dollar value, is the G9 really bringing a huge improvement on the still side over the GH5? That was the main question that I wanted to answer. So that's kind of where I've been with this comparison, and I'll answer some questions here specifically. I don't want to necessarily speak too soon about my final conclusions. I'm going to put those in the video that I'm doing this week about kind of my little real world review. But my goal is not to stretch this out into a whole bunch of very detailed reviews, because for whatever reason I'm kind of out of gas on doing reviews in great depth, especially at this point, because I've kind of made my decision. And like, when you're reviewing something that you don't really care about, I suppose there are people, probably better people than I, who can do real in-depth reviews on and cover like all the bases. But right now I'm trying to memorize literally hundreds of bones in the human skeleton for school, and I have to know all those tiny little bones and the little holes and the foramen and the fissures of like everything in your skull. And I'm not really interested in doing that double time for a bunch of camera stuff if I'm not going to be necessarily using it in that grade of detail. So, but answering specific questions is something that I can do, and that's what I like to do in this live stream. So, anyways, good evening to all of you who are here. I hope you'll bear with me because probably not going to be a marathon live stream session tonight because like I said, I have 4 tests this week that I need to kind of get back to studying for. So would love to chat now a little bit, and thank you guys. I saw Pete in here. Thank Queen of San Joaquin. I see Qane, and let's see, King Yuzi's in here too. So a bunch of you guys, glad to see you all here. Let me see, kind of scroll back a little bit, see if I can get some comments. Yes, Peter, this is literally the first time I've ever started a live stream on time, so I am kind of excited about that. Okay. Cool. Queen of San Joaquin. Oh no, that was not Qane. That's Queen of San Joaquin. I'm sorry. I misread your avatar there, Queen. King Yuzi G9 is a borrowing, so not really a rental or a gas situation. Let's see. So Queen of San Joaquin says, I've been looking at the Olympus EM10 Mark II in detail, and the only thing that I'm hesitant about is that it's not weatherproof. Is that really that important? I live in dusty area with low humidity. I'm worried I might have to get the sensor clean a lot. Not sure though. All right. I think that if the question of weatherproofing is a really interesting one. I like weatherproofing on my cameras just because it makes me feel good. The truth is that, especially if you're in an area with low humidity and you are careful about the way that you handle your camera, the way I look at it is that weather sealing isn't going to give your camera necessarily any kind of definitive ability to outlast certain weather conditions indefinitely, but it will buy you a little bit more time. Sensor cleaning is something that is usually a good idea at some point anyways, but if you're looking at a camera that's on the relatively cheap side, I think that the price that you would have to pay to buy a camera that would include weather sealing, and this I think is part of the reason why they typically only put weather sealing on the higher end models, is that you're not getting the amount that you'd have to spend on on a camera that's weather sealed is the same amount that you could pretty much just buy a second iteration of that camera and have 2 bodies and have a spare to go if you like the EM1 Mark II. The next kind of price range up that you're looking at weather sealing in a camera body like that is probably going to be around $1,000. EM10 Mark II is going to be around $300 to $400 for one, so you could buy a second one of those, and 2 of those, if you take care of them well, would certainly last you as long or longer than one equivalent body that featured weather sealing on it. So to my mind, I think that weather sealing is a nice thing to have, but it's not something that I would say that it is imperative to have. I think it's a little bit more useful or a little closer to being necessary if you're in a really humid climate where there's a lot of moisture around. But if it's fairly dry and you are attentive to what you're doing and you're careful with it, try to minimize the time that you have the lens off of the camera. For example, I spent a lot of time backpacking and traveling. When I would have to go change the lens on my camera, when it was possible, I would try to think ahead and avoid changing the lens if I possibly could. There were definitely some situations where it was just too dusty, too windy, and I wouldn't change the lens, and I would just make do with what I had on there. But I would also go in my tent to change the lens, or if I was car camping, I would go in the car and do all of my lens changes in there where there was less air moving. So wind is definitely not your friend. I saw a couple other good comments here just kind of fly by. Richard Jones says, make sure your camera is switched off when you're changing lenses. There's a static charge that attracts the dust if it's on. That is a very good point. Keep it switched off when you're changing lenses. The other thing too is like if you can kind of keep the body pointed like down and away, so that again you're protecting that opening on the camera rather than just leaving it out exposed to the world, or up where you're looking over it and like the skin cells, the stratified keratinized squamous epithelial tissue that will be exfoliating off of your scalp, where that would fall into the camera body and etc. Those are things you want to be aware of, so the way you position and maneuver the camera when you're changing the lens. And if you keep it to a minimum, you'll be generally, I think, in pretty good shape. The other thing too is, even if there is a little bit of schmutz on your sensor and it's a little bit dirty, there's a great deal that you can do. In many cases you have to look really really closely to be able to see it, for one, and number two is that when you look that close, you're going to be in Lightroom anyways, or you need some additional software. Unless you're printing enormously sized images, you're going to be able to fix a lot of that stuff in Lightroom as well. I know that best practices dictate that you clean your sensor every so often, every period of time. I think usually every 1 to 2 years is what people typically do. I have not cleaned any of my sensors on any of my cameras, because I'm not going to start cleaning my sensors until I see some sort of something in the images. And I poke around my images a lot, and if I start to see something, well, then I'll send it out to get it serviced. But otherwise I'm not going to clean it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's my perspective. And your mileage may vary, but Queen, I know you've seen my images, you've seen the stuff that I make, and there definitely are people who are much more particular about what they do with their cameras and with their processing and with their lenses and all of that than I am. I feel like I'm somewhere in between the pragmatic of just doing the best I can with what I have and just throwing caution to the wind, but also having some methodology to try to be a little bit deliberate about it as well. And that's pretty much been my experience, is just if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but be prepared for it to break, because it could. And there I've had some difficult some difficult times out in the weather, but generally speaking, a dry bag to keep it dry. And when it's going to be really windy, and if it's going to be really awful, sometimes it's just less fun to go out and shoot on those days anyway. So just hell with it, leave it home and wait till the weather's a little bit nicer. That's kind of the way I look at it, because all the weather sealing in the world actually isn't going to prevent any particles getting inside of your camera when you change the lens. That's something that the best weather sealing won't help you with. So that's something that you need to be mindful of all the time, in my opinion. But everybody has different methods, so other opinions are still valid. But yeah, Daniel, I hold my breath when I change my lenses too. I think that's a good a good way to go. Um, I'm just reading back through the comments here, what everybody is talking about. Okay, let's see. Peter Kent suggests getting some gaffer's tape and wrap the area where the lens mount meets, and then also never change lenses. That's a good-ish idea. Um, yeah, dust travels in a lot of different directions. Queen of San Joaquin says, I think I'm at an impasse right now. I just wanted to see what we all thought about the different cameras and the weather sealing. I think, honestly, for weather sealing, unless you're prepared to spend somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,000 on the camera body alone, that really it's not something that I would look at as being a major issue or even worthwhile investing the money into from that standpoint. As a first camera, I think that what you got, with the EM10 Mark II, it's good value at a very low price, or even like a G7, which the G7s might be coming down in price now that the G9 is out. That may drop the price a little bit too. So I think that's there's some potential there, but either one of those are I think really versatile cameras that'll do a lot for what you're looking at for your first camera. Yeah, Peter recommends the G7 as well, so I can't be all wrong on that. Monchito Pro says, what's best what's best, a great sensor or a great lens for low light photography? Well, little column A, little column B. It depends on, what you're trying to do, what type of low light photography. I think that if you are talking about very low ambient light photography like astrophotography, I think that probably your lens is going to make a bigger difference. Although honestly, um, both is really the answer. You want a good sensor, you want a good lens. The thing is being able to look at the type of low light photography you're doing and make assessments from that direction. So, for example, in low light photography, where you do have specific points of light that are creating a light source within your scene that is significant, like shooting street photography at night. That's something where I think improving the lens can go a really long way, because you may wind up with a lower key image, a darker tones in your image, but the light sources will still show up and will still show through. Whereas if you're doing something like astrophotography, there's a limit to what you have to work with, because you can only keep your shutter open for so long before the star trails start to form, and the stars are no longer sharp in the image. So you have to be able to work with your ISO and the light gathering abilities of your sensor to be able to make a good, crisp, hopefully bright image within the allotted time frame that you have. So astronomy photography, and you want long exposure for astrophotography, I would say if that was the main thing that I was going to be shooting, I would probably look at the Nikon, either the D500 or the D800, for full frame. If I wanted a camera that could do a little bit of everything and could do some nice astrophotography too, I would probably look at something with the Fuji X-Trans 3 sensor in it, because that's a nice balance. But yeah, if I'm going to be doing something where predominantly I'm going to be shooting a lot of night landscape stuff with very low ambient light, using just a little bit of starlight and astrophotography, where you really have to have maximize the light gathering opportunities there, then yeah, I would say probably the Nikon D500 or the D800 from what I have seen. And I think that's the right. It's the 850, or I'm sorry, not the 800, the 850. I believe the or is the seven? No, the five. Yeah, the D500 and the D850. I believe the 850 is the new one that just came out. I'm not super up to date on all the Nikon models, but from what I've heard about those, I used to shoot Nikon full frame when I was doing a lot of astrophotography, and it's absolutely beautiful, for all the stuff that we love about the little cameras. And I don't have any regrets about going to Micro Four Thirds for the time being. But if I was going to be doing a lot of landscape astrophotography shots at night, I would want a full frame sensor, because there the light gathering is very, very critical. When you have subjects that are kind of close to you that are lit, and you actually have direct light sources that are there, you can maximize the use of those light sources, with better glass and various editing techniques that might still force you to have darker images than you'd like, but it's at least it's a different story than, like, when you have that 20-second time limit and you have to be able to make the most out of that, and there's only so much you can do with a small sensor on that. Yeah, which places for astronomy photography that I would recommend around the world? That's a great question. And I'm going to get back to talking about the G9 and the GH5 here in just a second. I saw Adrian had some inputs there about that. I would say that my favorite places to shoot astrophotography probably in the desert southwest. Nevada and like the White Mountains in Nevada, right in between sort of the California and Las Vegas border. So they're at about 10,000, in the same area where the Methuselah tree is the oldest living organism that I guess that they know of on Earth, the Methuselah tree. It's near an observatory at about 10,000 feet, and it's pretty dark, and it's pretty remote, and it's pretty beautiful, and it's high enough up that you can shoot some really great stuff. The other places that I like also in the desert southwest are You know, I've seen some really nice stuff in Death Valley, although I haven't shot there. But Zion National Park has some really beautiful stuff, especially in Zion National Park. If you go up on the Kolob Terrace, or better yet, if you hike out to Observation Point in Zion, and if you hike in from the top, you'll save yourself a huge amount of effort. The alternative is to hike up from the valley floor. I always prefer to go in kind of flat along the mesa from the top, but that whole area surrounding Zion National Park is really, 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 really fantastic. And basically, the way I always think of it is the areas that have striking landscape features and a minimum of light pollution. So, areas like Joshua Tree and Yosemite are really beautiful. At least Joshua Tree. I can't speak to Yosemite. I haven't done a lot of astrophotography in Yosemite, but I know Joshua Tree is really beautiful. There's some really cool rock formations that look just very otherworldly, but it's so close to LA and a few of the other cities that the light pollution is kind of an issue. So anywhere you can get out in the country, you know, I mean, even where I am right now, I'm not in a very exotic area where I can shoot a lot of different types of astrophotography. I'm in upstate New York right now, so that's part of the reason why I'm not shooting with a full frame, you know, camera system anymore, is because I'm just not do. I don't have the opportunity to do a lot of that. But the yeah, the upstate New York, you can still find some really, like in the Adirondack Mountains and stuff. Pretty much anywhere that you're located, if you drive within a few hours, you should be able to find somewhere that will enable you to do, you know, do some pretty decent astrophotography if you have a good kit for it. But get away from the light pollution. That's the way to go. Do I have some samples to show, like boreal aurora in Alaska and Finland? Yes, I actually lived in Alaska for a while, but unfortunately, that was before I started shooting. That's one of the things that inspired me to take up photography. I have seen the stars, the aurora borealis up there, and in a way, I'm kind of glad that I saw all that before I started shooting, because I would have missed it all because I would have been too busy goofing around with camera settings. And that's one of the things, as much as I love being outside with a camera, I also love just like turning the camera off and just sitting and enjoying where I am, because not everything has to be captured and shared. So no, I don't have any images that I have made of like aurora borealis or anything like that. I haven't been to a lot of really exotic photography locations. I'm not a true adventure photographer, since I have not gone on any photography tours, sightseeing tours in Iceland and photographed the whatever those waterfalls are that everybody always photographs. I've kind of, my adventures have been kind of self-guided and self-funded for the most part, and self-motivated. Although honestly, Iceland looks really, really beautiful. Scandinavia in general, love to go there. But so far, right now, it is not in the cards, at least not for a couple years until nursing school is done, because at the end of the day, I can actually get a cheap flight on Norwegian Air to Europe, but you know, still got to pay the bills. Okay. Let's see. Darren Andrews asks, did I find sharpening the Fuji files in Lightroom a problem with an emoji that I can't read? Bug-like artifacts appearing. No, I did not find any problems with that at all. I didn't find any problems with Lightroom on the Fuji files. I know a lot of people complain about that. But for whatever reason, either my eyes are bad enough that I don't notice it, or there legitimately is no problem there. But I did not have any issues at all. I also don't sharpen a lot with the Fuji files. There's very little additional sharpening that I'll put in there unless I'm shooting with vintage glass that is unsharp, and then I have to kind of, you know, put the sharpening back in. But on like the Fuji native lenses, I wouldn't do very much in the way of sharpening at all. Peter asks, how do I like the grip on the G9 over the GH5? And Adrian, I'm going to get to your comment in a second too. You know, interesting question. So the grip on the G9 right here is quite positive, meaning that it has a very stark shape. It's a little bit deeper, and it is a little bit more crisp. It's more positive. It's more, you know, you can really wrap your fingers around it. I would say I like it a little bit better. the GH5. You know, the grip is a little bit rounder, a little bit smoother, but in terms of the way that it actually changes the way I handle the camera, I would say that it doesn't change the way that I handle the camera. It's a little bit better, it's a little bit nicer, but it is not worth spending the money on in order to get a different grip, in my opinion. And now, Adrian, I am going to have to crush your dreams because I believe you were the person who was really talking up the G9 and really got me interested in it. And I have to say, you know, I think that the G9 is a really nice camera, but for my money, when you can get the GH5 that has all the video features that, and then some that the G9 has, you know, there's nothing on the G9 that, to my mind, makes it worth switching across for me from the GH5 to the G9. I really can't see any major advantages of the G9 over the GH5. And I did a bunch of testing, like head to head of the two, and for the most part, the two, like the files are indistinguishable. And you know, I really had higher expectations for this, and also for the price bracket at which the G9 sits. It's a really, really nice camera, but for $1,800, I'm not blown away at what it can do versus like the GH5, which you could get in very good condition with Vlog installed on it. The GH5, you could do that on, you know, on eBay. You know, and Peter's saying now that the GH5 has had a $200 price drop, so about the same price then for the G9 and the GH5. I can't see any reason to pick the G9 over the GH5 personally. So the video autofocus on the G9, I would say it's a little bit better. And again, these are not very scientific qualifications and comparisons that I'm doing, but I can say I can tell a small difference, a very small difference in the video autofocus between the G9 and the GH5. There is a small difference in that. I will say that. In the autofocus on stills, though, I found that the GH5 was significantly more accurate. And again, this is like same settings, same lenses, same lighting. That the GH5 was more accurate. Speed wise, I didn't notice a difference in terms of the autofocus for stills, but in terms of accuracy, when I was, you know, had it on face recognition or what have you, and you know, I was pushing the button, the GH5 got it right in the eyes like 4 out of 5 times, and the G9 was hitting my ears and my eyes were fuzzy about, you know, 4 out of 5 times. So it was, you know, it's not that I think that the G9 is a bad camera, but when I look at what $1,800 will get me, if somebody's asking me, okay, I'm buying a camera primarily for stills that also does some video thrown in, I would say Fuji X-H1 all the way. Now, I'm doing more robust video stuff that really does benefit from the unlimited record time and all the different, you know, whatnots that the GH5 has from the video side. And so I'm willing to eat the limitations in terms of the still photography that come with a smaller sensor on this. But if somebody says I have $1,800 and I want something that does awesome photos, awesome video, but I'm not shooting like, you know, huge commercial projects where I have to deliver 4K, you know, 60p and like all of that stuff with a 10-bit 422, I would say for your money, you're probably going to be getting more bang for your buck with the Fuji X-H1. And I know that that might be offensive to some folks. And I don't think that the G9 is a bad camera, just saying what my experience is of it compared to the GH5. Because the GH5, when you look at what you're putting in for that money, you're getting a lot out in terms of additional video features, though granted not on the still side. You know, the high res mode, there's a lot of testing that's been done on that. I didn't really use that. I don't shoot those like extra modes. It's like meat and potatoes is what I shoot. And if on meat and potatoes, you know, like great image quality, absolutely. But when it comes to like the durability and the dynamic range that I would associate with a Fuji file, And the fact that like a Fuji file, you can really manipulate, you can edit that file pretty significantly before it starts to crack and fall apart and starts to look over processed. Whereas the G9, the GH5, any of the Micro Four Thirds files, it's like you have a much narrower set point range where you have to kind of get everything where you need it, and then beyond that point you can't do nearly as much editing, and that's not bad, but it is a limitation, and the G9 shares that limitation, I believe, equally, as does the GH5. So for me, the G9 sits in a weird place. The G85, on the other hand, has a tremendous amount of value for what you get for the money, and you can get the body and the kit lens for $1,000. And for $1,000 to have everything that the G85 has, and I would say that the image quality is, in my experience, what I shot with the G85, what I've shot with the G9, what I've shot with the GH5, the image quality is not drastic. It's not $800 better on the G9 than it is on the G85. That's my take. And again, you know, if you really need the 4K at 60, then yeah, I mean, maybe that's worth $800 to some people. But to me, if I'm paying that much money for the 4K at 60, then I'll get the GH5 and get that with all the other bells and whistles on the video side. And I feel kind of bad because I know I heard so many really good things about the G9, and it's not that I don't like the G9. I feel bad, like I'm bagging on the G9, but it's just it's in a weird place in terms of the features that it offers, because you know, it just, the stills features that it adds, it doesn't seem like it's worth that it's worth the money for that over something like, say, the G85. Like the stills seem to be about the same to me, and I really wanted it to be. I wanted it to feel like I had to get this camera because I really like it. I like the ergonomics. I like it's a little squarer. The grip is a little bit beefier, more positive. I can really wrap my fingers around it. Like, I like it. I wanted to love it, and I just can't. I just can't. I mean, again, compared to the GH5, right? Compared to the GH5 and everything additionally that I get, you know, there are definitely some advantages. You can charge with the USB 3 on the G9. You know, it's got the high res mode. If you shoot that, the autofocus in video is definitely a little bit better, but in stills, for me, it was a little bit worse. It was a little less accurate. So tough call. But for me, I would say GH5. You know, the GH5 clearly wins it for me, and you know, I'm a little bit disappointed because I really wanted to love the G9. I really wanted to love it, but the good news is that if anybody has $1,800 and they're looking for a camera, uh, you know, Fuji. I think Fuji, again, if you're still primarily stills with a little bit of video, then Fuji is going to still be tough to beat, because really they do some really beautiful video in very small, non-professional, you know, like you can shoot it as from a handheld, right? Like if you're just shooting handheld, kind of run and gun, light and fast style, the X-H1 is going to be really good for somebody who's doing probably, you know, just casual video stuff, but wants really high quality, and really wants a camera that's going to make beautiful, beautiful stills. And that's going to, I should rephrase that, because it's not that the 4/3 sensor doesn't make beautiful stills. It's that the 4/3 sensor makes beautiful stills when only a very minimal amount of modification and editing is required to achieve the final look. Whereas the Fuji files, they allow us to be a little bit more haphazard in some cases and just be like, oh, I'm gonna, you know, do this in post, I'm gonna do that in post. Like, you can change all these things and really tinker around with stuff, especially I found in the color files. The color files on the 4/3, like, they just go to hell in a handbasket real quick when you start making larger edits on them. Whereas on the Fuji, like, there's a lot more that you could do. You could move the sliders around a whole bunch more before it really started to show up. So that's been my experience with the G9. I like the camera, but I can't say that I love it, especially compared to what you get with the GH5. So yeah, the GH5 versus the G9 and the XH1. It's like if you want video with a side of stills, GH5. If you want stills with a side of video, XH1. And if you want the high res mode and you really like the grip and you want the the viewfinder, the little window on there, which personally I doesn't to me it doesn't really do much. Than the G9, but it's like it's kind of a weird one. I really, really, really wanted this. I wanted to be using this and be like, man, these files, this is like, I feel like I'm shooting with a Fuji that actually has like beefier video stuff, like that dream camera that we've always talked about, where you have the stills capability of the Fuji with the video capability of the Panasonic, and it's just and the execution of the Panasonic and the battery life and like the battery life also I will say on the G9 is outstanding. Really good battery life. Same as I would say that I've noticed with the GH5, but the GH5 is in my opinion just a better value for money. Daniel asks, what time of day do I like to climb? I'm planning a hiking trip next week and I'm trying to decide what time to go in terms of photo opportunities and safety. Interesting question. Um, it depends on where you're going and what safety means from that standpoint. Like, is it someplace that has a very distinct destination that you want to photograph at a certain point in time, or is it something that's kind of, for example, like, are you hiking to the summit of a mountain where you want to shoot the sunrise off the summit of the mountain? And if you're 3/4 of the way up the mountain when the sun rises, that it's going to ruin your shot because the shot you wanted was this one iconic point. Versus, I'm going to go hiking on the Appalachian Trail and there's a lot of ups and downs. And so, as long as I'm going to be shooting kind of the whole thing and hope to get some interesting shots. One is very objective focused, one is a little bit more narrative focused. And I would say, both of them would benefit from being up early and being uncomfortable and inconvenienced by getting up early. Absolutely hate doing that. But, wherever you are is going to, like, if you're in some place that's less spectacular, but you're in good light in the golden hour in the morning and the afternoon, it's in a lot of cases it's going to look better than if you're in a really spectacular objective that you want to shoot, but it's in kind of flat light that's not very good. So Daniel says, I'm mainly going to explore this location. I haven't been yet, but it's about 2 hours from home. So in terms of safety, there's a lot of different type of safety issues that we could be talking about if we're talking about like exploring an urban location. For like street photography, are we talking about potentially like icy trails, stuff that's maybe aren't melted out first thing in the morning? In a less urban context, there's a few different ways that could go, but I would say get a headlamp. Bring plenty of layers. And when it really comes to safety, especially wintertime or when the weather is cold, you want to have a couple of extra dry base layers. So whatever is going to be close to your skin, carry an extra one of those. And when you get out of the car and you start hiking, you should be cold. You shouldn't be like completely like frigid, like hypothermic cold, but you shouldn't be comfortable. The idea is that as you start to move, you're going to start to perspire one way or the other, and you want to perspire in small enough increments that your base layer will be able to dry out. And the fastest thing that is going to chill you down and put you at risk for hypothermia and other kinds of exposure illness is going to be if you're wearing something wet close to your skin. So what I would always do is, have minimal amount of insulating layers. In other words, what you need in terms of insulating based on your experience, or I would hope that you do based on your experience in this particular climate that you're in. But the one thing that you can, with very little extra weight and space penalty, you can carry an extra t-shirt or two and even a pair of long johns or something, and roll that up and throw that at the bottom of your bag. And then when you start to get cold, or if you start to sweat, even if you start to sweat and you're not cold and it's like very chilly outside, strip down, take off your wet base layers, put on dry base layers, and you'll be in much better shape. You'll be much happier for it. And then in the meantime, whatever you just took off that's wet, tie that on the outside of your pack, let that dry off while you're hiking. And then even if it's cold, once it's dry, even if it's cold, in another hour you stop and it's pretty much dried out, you can put that thing on. It'll be cold at first, but then it'll warm right up because guess what? It's dry, or mostly dry. And then you're usually wearing dry base layers, and that'll help your body thermoregulate a lot. The other thing too is having the appropriate food type. Fat helps; it burns much slower, helps keep you warm, but also bring a mix of carbs and stuff like that to kind of kickstart your metabolism or whatever, and get plenty of hydration the night before. So pre-hydrating is a big part of the game. A lot of people think you drink when you get thirsty, but actually you want to drink before you're thirsty, and usually you want to drink the night before so that all your body tissue is fully saturated with water, and then that way you only drink a little bit while you're hiking. And you always want to keep an eye on the color of your urine, of course, because it should be clear, copious, and continuous. That's what we say in emergency response. We want clear, copious, continuous urine streams, so that way that you're staying hydrated. And in most cases, you're much better off trying to maintain hydration than you are trying to keep up with hydration. And that can go a long way to just keeping your head clear, keeping your energy up, and all that stuff. Cool. That sounds awesome, Daniel. A 40 to 70 degree hike in the mountains, that should be really solid. I would say pace yourself. I mean, generally speaking, the earlier you start is going to be for the better. You're better off having to wait a little bit than to get there and try to be rushing. Bring headlamps too, because if you have headlamps and you're hiking in the dark, that can make some really interesting photographic opportunities, to be able to shoot something that's just a little bit different, because most people are used to seeing, fairly straightforward images. And since I'm assuming you're probably going to bring either a Fuji or a Sony, you should have a camera that'll handle some decent low light photography. So headlamp hiking shots can be really neat, and I would do that and have a blast. Sounds really awesome. I'm a little bit jealous, but I'm going to be studying, trying to memorize bones of the body. So can't do too much of that right now. Um, Monchito Pro says I wrote poetry about photography. Maybe at some point you can post the link here. I'll have a look. I actually used to write poetry quite extensively myself. I was a uh, English and philosophy major, so I did a lot of that. Um, Actually, oh, okay, you posted it here. I will read it. Hopefully, I will not butcher it and get it true to the cadence that you had in mind. The photographs are true dreams that have been captured in time. They are like those stories that have happened, that were left behind, but still continue to be felt. Very, very nice. I like that. And I think that is both accurate, and that's also a very nice poem. I think there's a lot of room for different creative pursuits to come together, and that's why I have found sort of a synthesis between my photography and my video work, and my climbing, which to me is a creative pursuit, and also the new channel that I'm going to be starting here this spring at some point, which is going to be my more outdoor focused channel about like hunting, fishing, hiking, that kind of stuff that I love to do, because a lot of my fishing is based around fly tying and creating little microscopic fishing lures, and that stuff is a very creative pursuit. And so I think these different creative pursuits really inform each other well. And I'm also getting a guitar. I'm going to get back into playing the guitar, so maybe I'll do a few shredding videos here once I get my chops back. It's been a minute since I've done that. Queen of San Joaquin, no, I did not use the time-lapse video mode on the Olympus. Again, I only really tested the meat and potatoes stuff on there. The battery life, the battery life on the Olympus, I would say was, it was good, not great. For a camera like that using very small batteries, I think that you could probably get away with most of what you're going to be doing. Probably, for a full day of shooting, I would take like 4 batteries. So, It's not like, with the G9, I shot for a pretty full day and did image and video review on the G9 with one battery. I had a second one just in case, but I was able to shoot for, a pretty light full day on the G9 with one battery. If I was going to be doing like a solid full day, I would have two or three batteries, but I probably wouldn't even get halfway through the second battery. That's been my experience when I shoot like longer full days with the GH5. Something like the Olympics EM10 Mark II, it's got a smaller battery. It's you're going to want at least three or four of them for a full day of shooting. But at the same time, I would still say that that's pretty decent battery life. So it's not something where it's like really bad, but it's about on par with like what I would say the Fuji's are, somewhere between around like right around 250, 300 shots or so is shooting stills, and I would say probably somewhere around like 15 to 20 minutes of continuous recording on the video is about what you're looking at. So good for shorter clips, but if you're going to be doing longer clips of like 10-15 minute talking head stuff like this, then you're probably going to want to have, well, you're definitely going to want to have multiple batteries, and at some point eventually you want a camera that can where one battery can get you a longer duration of record time. But that was my experience with it anyways, and other people might have different experience they can share. But that's what the short time that I was shooting the Olympus, that's what it seemed like to me. And good evening, Tiff. Good to see you here. By the way, I love your new profile picture on Twitter. I don't know where that picture came from or what inspired you to change it up, but I like seeing the consistent refreshing of the profile picture. That's good. That's good. So, okay. Yeah, unfortunately, Tiff, you are a little on the late side. Ordinarily, this is when I'd be just warming up. But unfortunately, tomorrow I have an exam, and then on Wednesday I have three exams. So A&P is pretty much half of that microbiology, if like because there's labs have their own exams, so it's like lecture and lab. So tomorrow I have A&P lecture exam, then I have lab exam for A&P, and a lecture exam, and like a homework that's graded like an exam as well. So I have a lot of studying that I have to do. I have to go and do that. Ordinarily, like I said, 45 minutes would be just kind of like just getting warmed up, but this is where I think I'm going to leave the live stream for this evening. If anybody has any questions or comments that you want to just drop before we sign off out of here, I'd be happy to address anything here quickly, and hopefully we'll do this again very soon, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week. I have a couple of videos coming out. The next two videos I'm going to be putting out, one is my sort of real world review of the G9, and thank you, Tiff. That's very nice. I really like the images out of the G9, and for anybody who's curious, my purpose is not to bag on the G9. It's just that the GH5, to my mind, is as good as the G9, so it's like, what's the point? It just seems kind of, I just don't get it, and maybe I'm not using the camera in the right way, but it's a nice camera, but it's not, for me, compared to the GH5, and compared to the extra value that you get with the additional video features on the GH5, I don't really see the difference between the two. Unlike the G85, which is outstanding value for money. Outstanding value for money. I mean, for the most part, when somebody has a little bit of money but they don't have a lot, and it's like, what's the best kind of balance between everybody? G85, hands down. The G9 is just a slightly less. The GH5 was the flagship, and now the GH5S is sort of like a flagship variant. And yeah, I saw the GX9 as well by Panasonic, and that's just like it. It's gone even further from having the video functionality of the GX8 that almost made it a nice hybrid system, but didn't have the external mic. So they still don't have the external mic, and then they changed a few other things to just make it less video capable. So the GX9 is just not even on my radar at all. And honestly, like I think this is a nice way to wind down. Well, that's true. The red ring really, I'm not gonna lie, the red ring is it's really pretty. Like it makes it seem like okay, it's the real deal. Like it's like the GH5 is nice, but like come on, where's the red ring? Like this could be any camera. This could have gotten this thing at a yard sale, right? But yeah, it's in a lot of ways it's nice because if I had gone with the G9, it would have been like in my mind, anyways, it would have been like this whole new like okay, let's talk about the G9 a whole bunch. I'm glad I got to test the G9. I think it's a nice camera. I'm glad I can answer people's questions about it now if they have it, but rather than buying it and spending the time and effort to move laterally, because for about the same dollar value I could trade out of the GH5 into the G9, but and then that would bring with it a whole new series of like, oh, let's talk about this and this and this and the features and specs, and let's do different review videos. I'm kind of ready to get out of the gear mode, but I just kind of want to finish this stuff up. I have one video about what I shot with the G9, then I have the one video where I kind of do a little comparison between my Nikon full frame f1.4 system and so kind of like Bokeh Monster against the an adapted $40 lens on the GH5, and I think that some of the results of that video might be interesting and surprising because for the price difference and all that and the function difference, I thought it was interesting to compare the pros and cons of like the mega bokeh, super fast full frame system versus the the paltry 4/3 system that is too shallow and all of that stuff in terms of depth of field. So take care, Queen of San Joaquin. Thanks for your questions and for hanging out here tonight. So anyways, that's what I got in the works after I get my studying done. Did I do an AF test with the GH5 at 30p versus the G9? Not as such. I didn't do like a head-to-head video test. I hate doing head-to-head video tests. Like Max Yuriev can do that stuff. I hate doing head-to-head video tests. It's a pain in the butt. I'm sorry, that's not the nicest way to look at that, but that is how I feel about it. I will say, anecdotally, not testing them, right on each other, I would say that the video autofocus at 30p for the G9, it was noticeably more solid than that of the GH5, and whatever advantages that the G9 has in terms of processing, I feel like it's likely that many of those advantages could be added into the GH5 through a firmware update in within the next several months anyways. There's not a lot of advantages there that I think couldn't be added, but the autofocus for video was definitely noticeably more tight. It stayed locked on. It didn't hunt nearly as much. And I still have to look more closely at that video footage because I'm still editing that, but it looks pretty darn good. But the responsiveness is the thing that can be a little bit tricky, and the responsiveness in the autofocus was not as good. So that was one of the things that struggled. It's like once it knows where my face is and I'm sitting there, and this was using like the single area. So when I would gesture and be like, "Hey, check out the this camera," and like that camera, kind of getting it to shift back and forth between those two, very kind of hit or miss. Sometimes it would switch really smoothly and nicely. It would switch quickly, but not so quick that it was like jarring and looked ugly and digital. And so that was really cool. There were sometimes I was like, whoa, that's beautiful, like the way that it did that. And then there's other times when I'm sitting there like, okay, come on, focus, and it's just not doing anything. And I'm trying to like kind of, bring the edges so that the contrast between the edges of like the dark camera and the light background in kind of massage the focal area a little bit so that it'll see, okay, there's an object here right in my face. You need to focus on it. And it wasn't very responsive. But when it figured out what something was, and it's probably possible to fine tune that, and maybe they will fine tune that through firmware updates. Maybe there are different settings in the camera that I glossed over. But I would expect that a lot of those things eventually are going to trickle down into firmware updates for the GH5 as well. I would like to think so. So cool, good questions. Yeah, I mean, definitely there's that advantage there, but I don't know that that's I don't know if that's if that's worth what you are losing in terms of additional video features, because I figure that most people that are shooting higher end video, they're probably going to be wanting to use manual focus anyway. So maybe if you're a YouTuber, I could see that being an advantage, but otherwise, I mean, even for most of my YouTube videos, right, I'm usually using manual focus for the most part. So cool. Good talk, guys. Appreciate you guys tuning in, taking the time. If you're not subscribed already, make sure you do that, so that way you'll get identified. No, you'll get notified. And I'm going to go work on my tests and my education so that I can go make more videos in my free time. And if you want to support what I'm doing here, making videos, testing cameras, running around out in the woods, and doing stuff, you can check out the Patreon, patreon.com/livingvertical. You can support that way. And thank you to you all here who do support already, and just the time you spend on the channel too is a huge support, even if you're not financially contributing anything directly. Appreciate having you guys here as friends and as an audience. Nobody deserves an audience, least of all me. So I'm grateful. All right, guys, have a good evening. Enjoy the remainder of your weekend. And goodbye, eventually.